Out topic today, the design and evolution of the presidency. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are going to explore one of the most fascinating aspects of American government, the design and evolution of the presidency. This is not just a history of an office. It's the story of how a single position, crafted in the late 18th century, has grown, transformed, and adapted to the challenges of governing a modern superpower. Let's start at the beginning. The Constitutional Convention, crafting a new executive. In 1787, the United States was still a fragile young nation, struggling under the Articles of Confederation. At that time, there was no true national executive, no president as we know the office today. Congress had a presiding officer, but this was more a ceremonial chair than a position of leadership. The experience under the Articles convinced many leaders that a weak executive simply could not hold the country together, especially in times of crisis. At the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, the delegates faced a crucial question. How do you create an executive strong enough to lead, but not so strong that it becomes a king? Some delegates favored an executive council, multiple leaders sharing power. Others, like James Madison and James Wilson, argued for a unitary executive, believing a single leader would be more decisive, more accountable, and less likely to descend into endless political infighting. After much debate, the idea of a single president prevailed, but they did not hand over unchecked power. Instead, they embedded checks and balances into the Constitution. Article 2 would define the president's powers, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, the power to appoint judges and ambassadors with Senate approval, and the responsibility to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Setting the tone, George Washington's presidency. When George Washington took office in 1789, the presidency was a blank slate. Washington understood that everything he did would set precedents for generations to come. He established the tradition of a cabinet of advisors, used the veto sparingly, and, perhaps most importantly, voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms. This gesture reassured a wary public that the new republic would not slip into monarchy. Early presidents navigated a delicate balance. They were national leaders, but operated in a political culture that still placed most power in Congress. The presidency was important, but it was not yet the center of American political life. The 19th century. Growth through politics and personality. The first major shift came with Andrew Jackson in the 1820s and 1830s. Jackson was the first president to claim he represented the entire people, not just the political elite. He wielded the veto power not merely to block unconstitutional bills, but as a political weapon to oppose legislation he disliked. His bold approach expanded the scope of presidential influence and symbolized the rise of a more democratic politics. Throughout the 19th century, the power of the presidency ebbed and flowed, often depending on the personality of the man in office. Strong presidents, like Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, stretched their constitutional powers in times of crisis. Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and took command of the war effort in unprecedented ways. These actions, while controversial, demonstrated how emergencies could drive executive authority far beyond its normal boundaries. The 20th century, the rise of the modern presidency. The modern presidency really began to take shape in the 20th century. The scope of government grew, America emerged as a world power, and new technologies transformed communication between presidents and the public. Franklin D. Roosevelt was perhaps the single most transformative figure in this story. Faced with the Great Depression and then World War II, FDR expanded the federal government's role in ways previously unimaginable. He created the executive office of the president, issued hundreds of executive orders, and held the nation together through his famous fireside chats on the radio. He also broke Washington's 2-term precedent, serving 4 terms before his death in 1945. His long tenure alarmed many Americans, leading to the ratification of the 22nd Amendment, which now limits presidents to 2 terms. From the mid-20th century onward, scholars began speaking of the imperial presidency, a term popularized by historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. to describe the vast, sometimes unchecked growth of presidential power. During the Cold War, presidents increasingly acted as global commanders-in-chief, making foreign policy decisions and engaging in military actions without formal declarations of war. Post-Watergate and the struggle over limits. The presidency's growing dominance eventually sparked a backlash. The Watergate scandal and the resignation of Richard Nixon in 1974 prompted Congress to reassert its authority. The War Powers Resolution sought to limit the president's ability to commit U.S. forces abroad without congressional approval. The Budget and Impoundment Control Act curbed the president's control over federal spending, and the courts began drawing clearer lines on executive privilege and the limits of unilateral action. Still, the basic pattern remained. In times of crisis, presidents often act boldly. In quieter times, Congress and the courts push back. The presidency today, communication and the public stage. In the modern era, the presidency is as much about communication as governance. Theodore Roosevelt pioneered the bully pulpit, using the press to shape public opinion. Franklin Roosevelt used radio. John F. Kennedy mastered television. And today's presidents must navigate a 24/7 news cycle, social media, and a deeply polarized electorate. Political scientists speak of the rhetorical presidency, the shift from addressing Congress and elites to speaking directly to the people. This has changed not only how presidents lead, but also how the public expects them to lead. Conclusion: a balancing act across centuries. From its carefully measured design in 1787 to its sprawling modern incarnation, the presidency has evolved in response to the needs, crises, and ambitions of the nation. The founders intended it to be powerful, but not unchecked, responsive, but not easily swayed by fleeting passions. Over more than 2 centuries, that balance has been continually tested. As we look ahead, the central question remains the same as it was in Philadelphia. How do we maintain a presidency strong enough to lead in times of crisis, yet constrained enough to preserve liberty and democracy?